Ciao Leo, ciao everyone, good morning, good afternoon I think for someone, and good evening maybe for someone else. So as agreed, Leo, I'm gonna share a few slides on what it means responsible sourcing for Ferrero, and then after that we will have some Q&A. I'm gonna share my screen. You tell me, guys, if it is okay, if it is online.
Yep,
Perfect. Excellent. So when we speak of responsible sourcing for Ferrero, the strategy that we set up around probably now it's 2 years ago, it's quite straightforward. We do four things. We we call it 4 steps approach. We do 4 things. We start with the due diligence, all our suppliers, and our due diligence is for all categories, from raw materials to general procurement, no exception. All our suppliers need to undergo our due diligence. That, of course, it's gonna have different nuances depending on the level of risk and the level of the type of category. Then we have a layer that we call supply chain visibility. That means having literally mapping our origin, mapping our sources, especially for this applies mainly for all our raw materials. We have an additional layer that is standards and certifications, because it's key for us to, for our most important raw materials, to have a minimum standards and certification in terms of sustainability. And when we deem that all these steps are not enough, we add our remediation or mitigation programs, which are direct investments that we do only on our supply chains. And clearly, as you see from the graphic here, is the logic is the higher is the risk in the commodity, the more we add layers. And of course, with the logic that we start with a common basis for all the suppliers, that is, as I said at the beginning, that is the due diligence. And it clearly covers the whole portfolio of vendors of Ferrero. And if you think of it, it's quite simple. Basically, we start with the first layer. That means know your suppliers. Second point is know your supply chain, know and map your supply chain. Third point is know how your supply chain works and steer how your supply chain works. And fourth point is support your supply chain. So this is our strategy. This is how we are working, and what I'm going to show you in the next 4 slides is basically an extract of what we do for each of these streams. So supplier risk management or due diligence, it's a very hot topic. And why we do it, I mean, the food industry is changing the way it's approaching this topic. And there are clearly 3 drivers that are pushing us in this direction. Of course, consumers asking us where we source our ingredients. They ask us how we source. And more and more retailers are also going obviously in the same direction. And they're asking us basically exactly as we do with our supplier. We are their suppliers. They're asking us to have a minimum level of sustainability rules in the way we manufacture and we source. And of course, even more important, the regulation. Regulation is coming out in Europe, a global, let's say, a European regulation on the due diligence. But in some other countries, they have their own regulation, maybe on some specific part that is not that could be on human rights. US has the CBP has its own, let's say, reasonable care practice and rules on how we should source. So the regulation is also pushing the industry in having a due diligence structure and system and process in place. So basically, know your supplier is for sure. It's gonna be mandatory in the future. And what it means due diligence, it's quite simple. It means knowing where are the risks, basically knowing where are the risks and having a strategy in place to mitigate these risks. Next step is what we call in Ferrero supply chain visibility. That, as I said at the beginning, is know and map your supply chain. Basically, here two examples of the platforms which we use to for supply chain visibility. Clearly, we use Sourcemap. Here it's an example for cocoa, but we are deploying Sourcemap also with our hazelnut suppliers, and we have a plan to slowly involve most of our key commodities on the Sourcemap platform, and this is for us to build the minimum level of visibility for our raw materials, and when we deem this, again, this is not enough. We go even beyond, where we have more information. That, for example, where we are more advanced, like in palm oil, we use Starlin, which is a satellite monitoring, leveraging Airbus infrastructure. And today we are at the level that we monitor 100% of our plantation in palm oil through Starlin. And we have a process for which we review every month. We review the alerts and we understand if there are changes undergoing in our plantations. And this is where we are on the supply chain visibility. When it goes to standards and certifications, we leverage a broad range of certifications, and also in some cases we even go to company standards. We go to company standards when we believe that the certification in place in this specific category, it's not enough or it's not deployed enough. For example, in the hazelnut, there are no significant standards. We thought, and this is let's say historical choice of the group already back many years ago, to develop our own sourcing standard. We called it Ferrero Farming Values, and it is applied on hazelnuts. But when we think that the standard and the sector has already deployed a robust and relevant standard, we clearly leverage that. This is, everybody knows, Ferrero is 100% RSPO. We are 100% even segregated. We use broadly use certification of rainforest and fair trade. For example, for cocoa, we use Buonsucro for cane sugar. So our strategy is quite simple. So if there are significant standards that are recognized by the sector, we clearly leverage that, like our competitors. If in the sector we don't see this standard deployed or robust enough, we develop our own. And going to the last point, is what do we do in terms of mitigation programs? So we cannot do it on all the commodities, but there's a clear choice based on the commodities that are more relevant for us and where we think more support needs to be provided to the supply chain. In the first case that you see is Save the Children. We started a pilot some years ago, I think it was in 2017, on few communities in Ivory Coast. It was quite successful. After that, we really decided to significantly invest, and we signed a program, a 5-year program, on to cover 65 communities in Ivory Coast where we source, which is probably one of the key areas in one of the key regions of Ivory Coast where we have most of our supply chains and most of our farmers. And the idea is in 10 years to basically fully cover all our, with the same program, with an extension with following 5 years to cover all the whole cocoa supply chain with Save the Children program. And this is a very ambitious program, but we deem this was a direct intervention that was necessary to have a minimum standard where we source. And we've done something very similar, clearly in a different context, with ILO in Turkey. This has a duration, this program has a duration of 3 years. And basically, together with our different engagement with ILO, in some cases together with the sector, and in some cases directly only us with ILO, we cover 7 regions of Turkey with the ILO programs to clearly combat child labor and ensure especially during the harvest season, to have educational programs where to enroll children, especially children of migrant workers. And we are very proud of this, because today we basically cover all the regions where Ferrero is sourcing in Turkey with this program, making sure we can never be sure, but clearly giving a strong signal, I think, to the market, and that we really believe we need to improve the situation, and this I think is starting to provide also some significant results. And Leo, I think this is it regarding my, let's say, overview of what we do in Ferrero, and I'm happy to have a Q&A. Feel free to shoot out questions.
Great, thank you, Nicola. So when you put in place a program where every supplier goes through due diligence, you map all the origins for your key commodities, how do you get buy-in from the suppliers, from the supply chain, to participate in this?
Well, this is clearly, in principle, I would say everybody is always happy to adhere to this kind of programs. Then the devil's in the details, and you probably know better than me that the problem is rolling out and deploying is much more complex. And so how do we do? The way we do it is, first of all, we ask all our suppliers to acknowledge and sign our supplier code. Our supplier code is requesting to have a minimum level of transparency with us, with Ferrero. So this is our starting point. So it starts there. And of course, we first of all start compliance and engaging, because in some cases suppliers don't even, they also have doubts in signing or acknowledging our supplier code. Maybe the discussion starts already there. Discussion starts already there with such suppliers that are how to say, have concerns in sharing data. And then most of the time, what we try to do is to understand what are the issues, what are the problems, And I have to say that in Ferrero take this very seriously, and in the case of suppliers that today are not willing to come along in this journey, well, unfortunately, we cannot have them working with us. And this is sometimes the choice we are doing.
Yeah, no transparency is the biggest risk.
Yeah.
What about internally inside the company? How do you have to get the buy-in internally? Do you have to prove return on investment for this level of transparency?
I have to say that, of course, also internally, you need to make education. There's one thing that is clear today, that is transparency is necessary in order to, as a license to operate, a license to grow. It's a protection, what we call it's a shield. So everything that we do in due diligence, everything that we do in traceability today is what we call it a clear shield. It's for us to be able to how to say to explain to the world what we are doing. But I think in what is happening more and more, especially in the engagement that I have with the marketing teams, is how this could be conveyed also to the consumer, because today is mainly let's say the audience that is more interested in this part is the institutions, organizations, different associations, NGOs. We are probably what we're going to see in the future is starting to communicate this also to consumers. And this, of course, will make the return on transparency, even the business case, I think, clearer.
That's what I was going to ask too. Is there, as you mentioned, consumers, you mentioned retailers, you mentioned regulators, and we're always keen to see how people are going to message. And I know Ferrero's been messaging quite a lot about its sustainability activities publicly. Is there a plan to even have any kind of traceability available to consumers?
I think it's a good question. I think we are probably the right answer. We are exploring this. We are at the beginning of an exploration of this topic.
You know, with these sort of enormous supply chains that you have to trace, to get visibility on, to manage the risks. You know, you've also been at the forefront of adopting these new technologies. You talked about the satellites. Obviously, we're working together. Where do you see this going? What do you think of as the future for supply chain transparency, for the initiatives that you're exploring?
But look, the future of transparency in supply chain, I think, is directly connected to the future of technology, the future of digitalization. But you cannot have one without the other. So the challenge clearly is that doing this in the agri value chain is more complex. Then if you do it as often we do, and you know better than me, in some developing countries, it becomes even more complex because there's a problem of infrastructure. There are several problems. So it is very complex. But the way I see it is that sustainability agenda in this case will go along with the agenda of technology and digitalization. And what I see in the future is that when you get to full digitalization of some supply chains, you'll get directly to full sustainability, basically. The way I see it is digitalization equal to transparency equal to sustainability. It will almost become how to say immediate, like a direct consequence.
I'm right there with you. If we do our job right, transparency will be automatic. You know, we're getting questions about how to use these kinds of technologies, use these kinds of due diligence approaches to verify, the practices on the ground and to verify the claims that you make publicly. I assume that's a big part of why you're turning to data to trace the supply chain.
Well, yes, because the way we are today, the way we are working today is as much as possible to back up the claims. So I would say, I would turn it around. We don't do the claims if first we don't have the data. So this is probably, if you see at the world of sustainability or the landscape of sustainability in the last 10 years, probably between 2010 to probably 2020, there were a lot of claims. Many of them companies were not able to achieve. Of course, probably I'm sure in good faith, but this has proven that without data, you cannot go any more out claiming something. And in this regard, as Ferrero, we've never been extremely vocal because it's part of our DNA. And I have to say that we probably started recently to be a little bit more vocal, but there's not a single claim that comes out if we are not 100% sure that we are extremely confident to hit it. So claim without data, it's something of the past. In the future, I think that again, I think there's a total equivalence.
That's a great way to close it. So great data, great claims, and great transparency. Thank you, Nicola.
You're very welcome, Leo. Thank you very much.